This video is sponsored by Skillshare.
All right, today we're going to play a little game of myth or fact or fiction when it comes to candle making and the candle industry. I'm going to go through 38 different statements, facts, insight, comments, 38 different things about candle making or the candle industry. Things that I've either seen in comments, questions, things asked on the YouTube channel or on my Facebook or Instagram accounts, or just things I just happen to read on my own. And I thought it would be fun to address those here with you. Hope you guys enjoy this. Let's have some fun. By the way, if you're new to this channel, my name is Wade. I'm the owner of Black Tie Barn, and this YouTube channel is all about making candles and running a small business. So thank you for stopping by, and I hope to have you around for future videos. All right, so let's get to it. Unscented candles are safer than scented candles. This is a myth. The reason that's a myth is because it's not the fact that there's fragrance oil in a candle that makes it safe or unsafe. Everything can be safe or unsafe depending on how it's used and how it's made. The number one problem with candles is being improperly wicked, or where it's burning, or for how long it's burning, or if it's unsupervised, not so much the fragrance that's in the candle. If you're using the recommended and proper safe amount of fragrance oil in your candles, then you don't have anything to worry about. Soy wax burns more slowly than paraffin wax. That's a fact. And that is because molecularly and organically the materials are different. How much slower, that's really hard to determine, although there are ways to measure that. It is a noticeable difference though. Next up, candle wax is edible. Yeah, this is a myth. However, what you might not know is that it used to be edible. And that is because candle wax a long time ago used to be made out of different animal fats and things like that. It's not the type of wax that we use today. And during times of famine, when people were really hungry and looking for sources of food to eat, people were actually eating candle wax. However, that's not the same today. So no, don't eat your wax. You should freeze your candles. This one is actually, no, it's still a myth. You will see that tip recommended every once in a while for a couple different reasons, but let's talk about why. A lot of people are making pillar candles or votive candles, candles that are in some type of mold, and it can be hard to get the candles out sometimes. And freezing them can help harden the candle, harden the wax, allowing it to pop out of a mold a little easier. So part of the recommendations you'll see for freezing a candle is that, but there is also a myth out there that freezing your candles or storing your candles in a refrigerator will help make the candles last longer. That's just not true. It's just not a fact. What it does do is harden your candle and can actually cause it to crack. And it can also mess with how well it burns. Typically, candles are around room temperature, and when you're making your candle and testing your candle and finding the right wick, you're using that same environment. However, if you go pull a candle out of the fridge or the freezer and it's a lot colder and a lot harder, that wick might not do as good of a job early on. The candle industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. This is a fact, and it's growing every single year. So if you are hesitant about whether or not there was a big enough market for candles, there is. Don't be afraid to jump in. Candle soot can be harmful. I hate the word can here. Anything can be, you know what? I'm gonna say it's a myth. I'm gonna say it's a myth. Anything can be harmful. A cup of tea can be harmful if it's too hot or I drink it too fast. I hate the word can there. So yes, technically speaking, candle soot can be harmful, but if a candle is wicked properly and burning properly, as it should, the amount of minuscule soot coming from your candle is not harmful. It's no different than some of the soot that you're getting in your kitchen off your pots and pans, microwave toasters, things like that. Problem comes with improperly made candles and improperly wicked candles. And that's why it's a hard one to answer and why I hate the word can. At least in this case. If the melt pool doesn't reach edge to edge on the first burn, the candle will tunnel. This is also a myth. Man, I can't tear those straight no matter what I do. The reason that's a myth is candles can catch up a little bit. So if you burn your candle and there's a little bit of a hang up on the first burn, second burns, or even the third burn, as the candle burns further down, lower into the jar, some of that residual heat will get trapped in the jar and help catch that up. So it's not a lost cause. It does not mean your candle's gonna tunnel. Now, if there's too much wax, then it could tunnel, but I wouldn't be afraid of a little hang up. And it also heavily depends on the type of wax you're using. If you're using a very hard wax with a high melt point, that may be true. If you don't burn the entire surface of the candle every single burn, it might eventually tunnel. But a lot of waxes, especially container waxes, are softer and lower melt point waxes, and it's not hard to get them to catch up later in the burn. Container or jar candles are the most popular candle in the US. True. There are a lot of different candle types. Votive candles, pillar candles, taper candles, wax melts, dessert candles. There's a lot of different types of candles, but by far and away, jar or container candles are still the most popular, at least here in the United States. Soy wax does not produce soot. This one is, no, that's a myth. That's a myth. Soy wax does still produce soot, It's just a lighter color of soot. It's more of like a white or a light gray type of soot. And so it still will do it. And you can actually still get black soot from it as well. But it is way less noticeable, and oftentimes it is producing less. So that is a myth though, that soy wax does not produce soot. In fact, anything that burns can produce soot. Essential oils are safer and better to use in candles versus fragrance oils. Myth. Let's try that again. Myth. Fragrance oils are specifically designed to work in candles, and they are completely safe to do so if you're using them appropriately. Essential oils are not designed to be used in candles. Can they be? Yes, but essential oils by nature can be very, very toxic, very, very hazardous. Yes, you can use essential oils in candles, but they need to be used in much smaller amounts. It can also be much more expensive to use, but fragrance oils are designed and much more preferred to use in candles for the most part than essential oils. They can be used, but to say that they are better or safer to use than fragrance oils is just not true. Triple scented candles have 3 times the fragrance. Myth. Now, for those of you that are brand new to candle making, you might be wondering, how is that a myth? If it's triple scented, it's going to have 3 times the fragrance. Here's the problem. Triple scented is a marketing tactic. Traditionally, candles used to actually be made with only a 3% fragrance load. That was the norm. Well, triple scented is based off of that norm. And in other words, that means 9% fragrance load. Well, guess what? 9% fragrance load is actually the norm now. Waxes these days can hold a lot more fragrance oil than waxes could in the past. Waxes in the past could only hold 3 to 5% fragrance oil. So triple scented just means 9% or so, and that's no different than any other candle. So don't fall for those marketing tactics and those myths. Probably just means theirs are like everyone else's. There is a best wax. Nope. You might have a favorite wax, and I might have a favorite wax, and candle maker next town might have a favorite wax, but there is no single best wax. Every single wax has pros and cons. But more importantly, the statement best is very, very subjective, because you might care more about a certain factor when it comes to wax or candles than someone else. You might think the most important thing about the wax is the natural color of the wax, or the melt point of the wax, or the hot throw of the wax, or the cold throw of the wax, or the price of the wax. So no, there's no best wax. It's just what wax is best for you. The living room is the most common place in the house for customers to burn their candles. True. According to the National Candle Association, that is a fact, at least in the United States. And what does that mean for you? Well, the living room is usually the largest room in the house, or one of the largest rooms in the house. So knowing that that room is the most common room for customers to be burning their candles, you should probably size your candles appropriately. Soy wax is water soluble. False. Soy wax is easier to clean up with like hot water and soap, but it's not water soluble. By definition, wax is not water soluble. It's never safe to pour wax down a drain, whether it's paraffin wax or soy wax. It doesn't matter. It is not soluble. The first burn of your candle and first melt pool creates a memory burn. I'm going to say this is neither, so we'll fold that over. The reason that is neither is it can, but not always. This is a concept that goes back to, again, traditional days of candle making, specifically when working with harder waxes, and even more specifically working with pillar waxes. And if you don't burn it very long and you create a small melt pool, it will just continue to do that and tunnel down the middle, because it's a very, very hard and high melt point wax. But with container candles, that's just not the case. Now, again, if you're using a very hard wax, then yes, it still could be true. And that's why I said it's kind of both. But for the most part, and again, we talked about this earlier a little bit, if you burn pretty close to the edge, you're gonna be fine. The candle will catch up most of the time. So just because the melt pool was this big around the first time, doesn't mean it's not going to get bigger the second time. In fact, with container candles, you'll often see the melt pool gets larger as the candle burns down. So I will say yes and no. That's both a fact and a myth. It just depends on the type of candle you're making. Adding fragrance oil at a low temperature to your wax won't work. I'm going to say myth on that one. This you're going to get a lot of debate on, a lot of different arguments on both sides here. In fact, on my channel, you'll find me talking about how most of the time I would prefer or recommend candle makers, especially new candle makers, adding their fragrance oil at a hotter temperature. And by hotter temperature, I'm talking around 180, 185, somewhere around there. The reason is it's just a lot easier to incorporate your fragrance oil with your wax. It's a lot easier to mix it all together. However, you can mix oil at a lower temperature. It just depends on the type of wax you're using and how much fragrance you're using, the density of the fragrance oil you're using. So it's not that it won't work, it just depends. It depends on your situation and your materials. Adding fragrance oil at a high temperature, for example, 185 degrees, will cause your fragrance oil to burn off. Also a myth. This one actually drives me nuts because it's just not true. There is a way to measure the microscopic amount of fragrance oil that might change as it's sitting in your wax. You can actually even try this yourself. If you get a scale that can measure tenths or hundredths of a gram, so take your pitcher of wax, set it on your scale, add your fragrance oil. Go ahead and weigh it and see what that is. Go ahead and stir your fragrance oil into your wax for a minute or two and then weigh it again. Has it changed? If it changed, it is 100th of a gram. It is so minuscule, it will make zero difference on the hot throw. So yes, there's a whole debate on whether to add your fragrance oil to low temp or high temp. But if you're saying not to add it at high temp because it's burning off, that's just not true. For fragrance oil to burn off, it has to be at a much higher temperature or a lot longer period of time. So follow your recommendations, do your own testing, but don't let the concern of fragrance oil burning off by you adding it into your wax at 180 degrees and stirring for a minute before you pour concern you. Next up, you should subscribe to this channel. Yes, that's a fact. You should click the like button below this video. Also a fact. The candle industry is saturated. Do not enter. Yes, the candle making industry is fairly saturated. Like most good industries are. A saturated industry does not mean you shouldn't be part of it. In fact, it usually is a hint that it's working. Focus on your product, focus on getting yourself out there, and you'll be just fine. Adding more fragrance oil makes your candles stronger. I think a lot of you probably saw that coming, but it is something that a lot of new candle makers struggle with. Because it makes sense, right? You would think that more fragrance means more scent throw. And sometimes that is true, but not always. There is a point of diminishing returns. If you're getting good results at 8% fragrance load and then you try 10 and you're not really getting much of a difference, then you've reached that point. You're just burning money at that point and not getting much more to show for it. And sometimes adding too much fragrance oil can cause other problems, like affecting the performance of your candle and clogging your wick. And if that's the case, it's not helping your hot throw at all. In fact, it could be hurting it. So no, more fragrance oil doesn't always mean a stronger candle. Candle net weight should be listed in both ounces and in grams. This is a fact, at least here in the United States. Now there's two important takeaways from that one. The first was the obvious one. It should be listed in both ounces and grams. So whichever one you use is fine, and then just also make sure you're doing a conversion to the other and both are listed on your label or warning label or wherever. The other takeaway there is that it's net weight, not the total weight. So don't take your candle and sit it on a scale. That's total weight and that is not accurate. The net weight, the amount of candle inside the jar. So weigh the empty jar, weigh the new jar with the wax in it. The difference is your net weight. Preheating your jars prevents wet spots. This one is fiction. All right, I know a lot of you are already screaming at me right now.
I preheat my jars all the time. I swear by it. It really helps.
Yeah, it does. Temporarily. So I'm not saying not to preheat your jars. There are definitely some benefits to doing it, at least in the short run. It does help cool your candles a little bit slower, which can help with the overall appearance of your candle. It can help temporarily with wet spots and jar adhesion. There are reasons to do it, and it's totally fine. However, as you scale, it really becomes not much of an option. But the reason I say it's a myth is wet spots are caused by two main things. The type of wax that you're using. Some waxes shrink more than others. Others don't really shrink or contract much at all. And then the other factor is temperature changes. As time goes on, whether your candles are being shipped to other places or sitting on shelves, changes in ambient temperature in your own house, as your jar goes through those temperature changes and your wax goes through those temperature changes, it's going to expand and contract and expand and contract. Even if it's just a very tiny microscopic amount, if wet spots are going to happen, they're going to happen eventually. They always come back at some point. Whether you see them or not, or long after it's gone to a customer's hands, they eventually come back. So again, I'm not trying to talk you out of preheating your jars, but to say that it always definitely prevents wet spots is just not true. You have to rename your candle scents for your finished product. I'm going to say this is neither. And the reason that's neither is it depends. If you're going to name your candle after the name of a candle that a big box brand uses already and they have it copyrighted to be used for a candle, then yeah, you can't use it. You're gonna have to change it. Also, some suppliers might require you to change the name on a fragrance oil for one reason or another. But most of the time, fragrance oils have generic names and there's no problem with using that name. If you think you have a great name and you really love it and want to use it and it's a catchy name, then just double check to make sure it's okay to use. After you've tested your candle, you never have to retest it again. Well, that's a huge myth. You should applaud yourself for doing that because a lot of people skip the testing phase and that's not a good idea. So yes, you're off to a good start with testing your candle, but things change. Wax batches change. Other factors may change a little bit and it's important to every once in a while go back and retest another batch of wax or another batch of your candles, pull one from the shelf and test it to make sure your results are still consistent. It's just a part of quality control and you should always be doing that. Candles catch on fire because of the wax. Another myth. So if you've been in any candle making Facebook groups, you might have seen examples of candles catching fire, and everyone's first thing is to blame the wax. Is it the wax's fault? No. At least not directly. The reason I say that is because there's a flash point of wax. Now, depending on the type of wax, it's going to vary somewhat, but almost all of them are well over 400 degrees. And so there's no real reason that one wax would catch fire more so than another wax. A properly made candle with a properly made wick is completely fine. What usually causes these fires is wick trimmings or other debris on the surface of the wax getting too close to the flame, overwicking your candle, meaning way too big of a wick, way too big of a flame, and too hot of a flame can also cause some issues. And a lot of people are using curling wicks, and as the wick burns and curls, especially if it's overwicked, that flame can get way too low and actually back down onto the surface of the candle. And that can also cause it to ignite and catch fire. But again, all of those are symptoms of an improperly wicked candle or a candle that's been burning way too long, not because of the wax itself. Candles come from the word candela. This is a fact. In fact, candela actually means torch. And if I remember correctly, this is back from like the Roman days, 500 BC or something like that. I think I read that somewhere fairly recently. But that is a fact. They weren't the first to make candles. Candles were made way before that in different ways. But kind of the traditional wicked candle that we think of today actually did come from that, and it came from the word candela. Candles really only sell well during fall and winter. Well, that's a myth. Now, is it true that candles sell better during fall and winter? Well, yeah, it's the most popular time because it's usually colder, people are indoors more, there's holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving, so yeah, they sell really well, but there's plenty of room and plenty of time to sell candles throughout the rest of the year. According to the National Candle Association, about 35% of candles are purchased and used during fall and winter. That still leaves 65% of the candles being sold the rest of the year, for the remaining part of the year. So if you only focus on fall and winter, you're cutting 2/3 of your potential profit and sales out of the picture. Candles used to be made of animal fat. Yes, that is a fact. In fact, I think I mentioned that earlier when wax used to be eaten during famines. And that is because they were made out of different animal fats. Waxes from sperm whales was frequently used, and it was used in all sorts of different things. Waxes, lubricants, and so on. So yes, that is a fact. You should never blend together fragrance oils. Well, that is a myth. That's part of the fun with candle making and experimenting with new scents is you could buy different fragrance oils from all your different suppliers, but you're not stuck with just those pre-made blends. Although there are like tens or hundreds of thousands of them, you can grab some and mix them together and come up with your own fragrances. It's a lot of fun. It's very, very common. There's no harm in doing that. Just make sure when you're doing that, you know your ratios, you're being very consistent. Of course, you test and figure out the proper wicking and all of that, like you would with any other candle. Next, you should check out Skillshare, which is the sponsor of today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes and is a place to get inspired and learn new skills. You want to learn more about this craft or maybe another craft, or how about business and productivity? Skillshare can help. My personal favorite thing about Skillshare is that it's all access to each and every video they have to offer. Not to mention, new classes are launched every single week. Now, I joined Skillshare a while back for several reasons. Business, marketing, and so on, but also for productivity and focus because I've always got a ton on my plate. For example, I'm a huge fan of Greg McKeown. I think I've read like all of his books. This class in particular, called Simple Productivity, How to Accomplish More with Less, is based off the idea of essentialism and is one of the best lessons and classes I've ever taken. Not to mention, it's a fantastic book. So before I get into the next fact or fiction, be sure to check out Skillshare in the description below. The first 1,000 people to use the link will get a free 1-month trial of Skillshare. Food coloring or soap dye can be used for candle making. Don't do that. Both food coloring and soap dye are typically water-based and should never be used for candle making. If you want to dye your candles, use candle dye specifically made for doing so. Now, some of you might be wondering about mica. Well, if you're going to use it sparingly and use it very carefully because it can clog your wicks. The same wax type at different suppliers is no different. I'm going to say neither on that one. Technically speaking, IGI 6006, for example, is the same no matter what supplier you get it from because it's made from a manufacturer and these suppliers are just distributors. They're just suppliers of the wax. Now, some waxes are only sold at certain places, but I'm talking about waxes here that are the same wax with the same name used at different suppliers. Technically speaking, they are the same, but they might not be. But there's two things that can make the wax behave a little differently for you. One is how long it's been sitting at that supplier. Waxes that have organic materials like soy in them do slowly break down and change consistency a little bit the longer they sit. So if you're getting a batch that's fairly new and fresh from one supplier versus a batch of the same wax from a different supplier that's been sitting around a long time, they're going to look, feel, and behave a little bit differently. So that is one factor. The other thing is they might just be totally different batches of wax anyways. Every single wax, when it's made by a manufacturer, has a variance, an acceptable level of variance, where the wax batch to batch might be slightly different, but it's within a range that's acceptable. And every time they make a new batch, it's got a different lot number, a different batch number. So when you order these same waxes from two different suppliers, you might be getting a different batch. In fact, it's likely. Now, is it enough to necessarily change your entire process or recipe? Usually not, but it can be, and it can require a slight change in wicking. So technically speaking, it's the same wax, but it might not be the same. Microwaves are great for melting wax. I'm gonna say myth. Can you use a microwave to melt wax? Yes, you can. And there's a lot of channels and blogs and recipes out there that have you do that, especially with soy wax. It's not that you can't do it, I just don't recommend it. And for a couple reasons. You could accidentally scorch your wax. So if you're gonna do it very carefully, little bitty bursts at a time, like 10 seconds or something like that. But I just don't do it. I don't recommend it. There's really only a risk to doing it. You don't need a big old fancy melting tank or big melting Digiboil like this, or even small scale wax melters or Presto pots. You can use a double boiler method if you need to. I personally would use a microwave as a very last resort. If the hot throw is good for me, then it will be for others. That is a myth. So we're not gonna get into all the details. I've got other videos that kind of go into this, but there are a lot of factors that will affect whether or not hot throw is good for someone else versus you, or versus anyone else for that matter. One is, it's very subjective. You might have sensitive smell and think everything is a strong scent, where someone else might have no sense of smell and they can't smell anything no matter if you put it right in front of their nose. And it depends on the size of room you're burning the candle in. It could depend on if they got the AC running, because that's causing more air circulation, which is pumping air in and sucking it back out. There's a lot of things that can affect hot throw. I have certain fragrances, certain candles that smell strong. And if you ask 9 out of 10 people, they would tell you it's a strong candle. And it's a fairly small one, and it still will smell up pretty much a whole house. But every once in a while, you'll get someone that says, I don't really smell it. There's not a whole lot you can do about that, because it's very, very subjective. You just don't know what's going on in every single environment. So just because something smells great for you doesn't mean it will for someone else. All right, this is a fun one. Most major candle companies have thousands of different candles in their product line. That is a fact. And I say it's kind of fun because all new candle makers are always asking, how many scents should I start with? And we typically say for brand new candle makers, start with like a handful, like 6 to 8. Launch your business with 6 to 8, and then you can slowly start adding some more. But then you'll have others say never carry more than 12 or 15 or something like that. Look, this all depends on the scale that you're trying to get to and the purpose, strategy behind your business. I think that's the best way to say it. This really depends on the strategy of your own business. But for all of you thinking and freaking out that you've got way too many fragrance oils and you're worried about having too many scents, a lot of candle companies have thousands of them. So I wouldn't say you got too many. I would just say make it easy on yourself and don't try to grow too quickly, too fast. And don't just add them to add them. Make sure they're good. Make sure you get a good product. You can use perfume instead of fragrance oils. No. That's super dangerous. Don't do that. Most perfumes, if not all, are alcohol-based for starters. And that's very dangerous. Those could catch fire. And I wouldn't want to put an open flame near those. Not to mention, they're not made for candles anyways, so even if they didn't catch fire and they weren't made of alcohol, you have no idea how they're gonna burn. They might clog your wicks. Just don't use it. There are tons of fragrance oils out there. Thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. They're made for candle making. Use materials made for this craft. Flickering flame means that there's something wrong with my candle. It does not mean that at all. There's a lot of things that can cause a flickering flame. First of all, a lot of flat braid wicks, as they curl, that causes a little bit of an off center, and that can cause them to waft and flicker a little bit. Drafts in the air, airflow, circulation, things going on in the house can cause it to flicker. Someone walking by your candle can cause it to flicker. So if your candle is doing a little bit of flickering, it's perfectly normal. Don't freak out or worry about it. Now, if your flame is doing a lot of bouncing, like heavy all the time with no apparent reason, there's no drafts, no one's near it, and it's just constantly bouncing like this, which I think all of you have probably seen that happen before, that is an indication that something is wrong. Too much fragrance oil, wrong wick type, wrong wick size. There's a lot of reasons. That is an issue, but a simple flickering flame, don't worry about it. Gel wax is actually not a wax. Well, of course it is. It's called gel wax. Kidding, that's true. gel wax is not a wax. It's actually a mixture of resin and mineral oil. It's not a wax at all. Now, it sort of behaves and acts like a wax. It serves as a fuel to your wick and to your flame, but it is different. It is not actually a wax. And if any of you have ever made a gel wax candle, you know it's quite a bit different than regular wax. Oh, one of my favorites. The same wick will work with every scent. No. It could, it might. In fact, you might use a lot of the same wick across most of your candles. But just because your candle is the same size and the same wax doesn't mean it's going to be the same wick, because fragrance oils can alter the wicking. I have an entire video. Granted, it was one of my first videos ever. It's fairly long. It wasn't my greatest production value, but check it out if you want. It's called All About Wicks, and I go into this with more detail. And there's some funny, interesting parts, so you might enjoy it if you haven't seen it already. Every part of a candle is part of the recipe, and if you change one thing about that recipe, you can change something else, right? If you change the fragrance oil, that's a different part. You've changed the recipe, which means your wick might need to be changed as well. So not only are you testing for the right wick type, when you change fragrance oils, make sure you're still testing, because you might need to change the wick size. Oh, one more. Look again. If you still haven't subscribed or liked this video, do so now. Appreciate all of you for being here. I appreciate Skillshare for sponsoring this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this format. Want to do something fun, something a little different. Hope you guys liked it. I hope to see you around on the next one. And don't forget to check out Skillshare in the description below. The first 1,000 people that use that link will get a free 1-month trial to Skillshare. I will see you all next time, and that is a fact.